Wow, when too much hysteria is never enough, hey? Today, when half the country and most of the media political class seems determined to generate as much alarmism and panic as possible over the pandemic, now we get the return of climate hysteria too. Sadly, Extinction Rebellion are not yet extinct, and they continue to rebel. A bunch of them ventured to the nation's capital this morning, and take a look at this. They set fire to a pram for some reason. Apparently some carbon emissions, some pollution is okay. They also vandalised Parliament House. Just disgraceful, juvenile, illegal behaviour. But listen up, can you hear the condemnation from most of the media? You know, the people who froth at the mouth about anyone who's protesting about lockdowns and the like? No, they don't mind this sort of stuff, do they? The leftist lunatics always seem to get a leave pass from most of the media. Some of the protesters actually glued themselves to the building. Why on earth wouldn't we just leave them there? It's beyond me why we wouldn't. I mean, leave them stuck to Parliament House on a cold winter's night in Canberra. How would global warming look to them after that, eh? Anyway, the excuse for the protest, the hook, if you like, was the release overnight of the 6th report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is the United Nations body that is seen as the scientific Bible, if you like, on global warming. It's pretty much the same as the previous 5 reports that have preceded it. Each time they say that the world is getting hotter and that human greenhouse gas emissions are a major cause. Each time they say we're running out of time, forever setting new deadlines or talking about new tipping points until they pass, and then they set new ones. Now, a couple of things about this debate are probably beyond dispute, such as the fact that global temperatures have warmed about 1 degree over the past century. The big unknown is still how this fits into longer-term natural patterns beyond our control and what human factors might be driving it. Now, I've read these IPCC reports in detail over many years, and they used to attribute up to half of the warming with reasonable certainty to our greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, up to half of the warming could be blamed on human activity. The biggest change in the reports really is that they've now attribute most of the warming to greenhouse gas emissions, and they do so, they say, with much more certainty. They say some of the weather extremes we see right now might already be exacerbated by climate change. But this all gets a bit tricky because they're far from certain on a lot of this stuff. I'll get a scientific analysis of all this later in the program, but the main point is the report says all sorts of extremes will be more common and get worse. More heat waves, more droughts, more floods, more everything. And it's all bad. The reports used to talk, naturally enough, about benefits from warming. Obviously, when the country or your environment gets wetter and warmer, in some regions that actually saves lives. It improves agriculture and productivity and the like. But now the UN only seems to preach doom and gloom. So everything is getting worse, they say. And we only have a decade or so to act, as they said a decade or so ago. The paradoxes in all of this are pretty obvious. The contradictions are pretty clear, but most media provides no proper scrutiny. They just go with the alarmist angle. There's much politics and alarmism in these documents, alongside, of course, all of the science. And this troubles me deeply because this is why the climate policy debate in countries like ours is so extreme, so nonsensical. They're really emotive rather than rational, ideological rather than factual, which is why you get utter lunatics and utterly rude pigs, actually, from groups like Extinction Rebellion doing stuff like this at the Department of Industry in Canberra last week.
No. We have a duty to act! Nobody is allowed to ignore this! Where police around you we are here for you.
Adults, apparently. Now, this stuff is just disgusting, isn't it? It's juvenile, idiotic, but it's just so arrogant, inflicting their lunacy on other human beings. These people are vandals, they're fools. They show nothing but contempt for their fellow citizens because they cause damage It's going to cost money. Someone has to go there and clean it up and repair it. They are lawbreakers and they should be sent to jail. Only custodial sentences will dissuade these nutters. It's not good enough to fine them or slap them on the wrist. Now, just on emissions reductions and Australia's role, though, this country has cut emissions and it's met its international targets, unlike most countries. And it's cost us a bomb, as you'll know, from your electricity bills. And we're committed to keep going, cutting by at least 26% by 2030, and with Scott Morrison promising net zero as soon as possible. So when you consider how the biggest emitter, China, is still increasing its emissions, we're clearly already going too far, too fast for our own good, because there's no environmental dividend from our pain. Our reduction of our tiny share of global emissions is about 1.3% globally. There's no environmental dividend from that when global emissions are rising. So these lunatics, the climate alarmists and the Labor and the Greens politicians who want to do more damage to our economy, to our lifestyles, to do even more to reduce emissions in line with their alarmist and emotive climate approach, they all fear, they're all about fear, and they have no consideration for the consequences. It's all about politics, of course, and not the substance, because there's not a sensible debate. It's all about posturing and politicking, and most media won't call it out. And any consideration of the facts shows that the extra policies they want Australia to adopt on emissions reductions absolutely cannot save the planet because of what the rest of the world is doing. But they can damage our country.